Okay.
You know where I am. Now, where are you?
In the library. We're in the library.
Library is where?
We're in Copperas Cove, Texas.
Okay. Now, where is that relative to like big cities and things?
We're near Fort Hood. You know where that
About
is?
an hour north of Austin.
Okay. Okay. It's really strange. It used to be if I were going to speak to a group like you, I'd have to drive to the airport and then fly somewhere to Dallas maybe and rent a car and then drive out there, stay in a hotel, and then we do this kind of session. And nowadays, here I am in my house, and we press a button. Of course, it gets a little complicated depending on if you're using Skype or Google or anything like that. So I always like to know where we are, and sometimes we're in different time zones and things like that. But Tangerine actually starts out in Texas, and then they start driving east, and they come to basically where I am now, a little bit further north of here, in, as I said, Winter Garden, Florida. So let me show you a few things that I have here in my office, and then we can get to your questions. And I'm thinking this is the book you read, the cover, because it has different covers. Okay, and this is the one I like best. Any of you who are artists or graphic artists, what they've done is what's called a repetition of shapes across the top. So they've got the round soccer ball, and they have Paul's head and his eyeglasses, and they have the eclipse of the sun all going across the top here, and then Paul's world on fire underneath. As opposed to this one, I don't know if you've ever seen this. This is the original hardcover, like 1997 copy of Tangerine. And the artist who did this cover really had never seen a citrus tree. These are like big oak trees with orange balls on them. Ball in the middle there. But now you have reached the end of the book, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because the artist did do like an inside joke, I guess you'd call it, on the front here. If you look at the title, Tangerine, it's done in white spray paint.
Oh!
It wouldn't mean anything to you when you picked it up in the library, but once you get to the end, it does. And then this is the first paperback cover, what Scholastic called the in-your-face cover. See Paul here with sort of lightning bolts in his eyeglasses, and then that gave way to the current cover, which they just repurposed. I'm really glad this finally happened. This is Tangerine en Español. I've been waiting for the Spanish translation of this for years. I mean, it has Hispanic characters in it. It has Spanish dialogue in it. So I wondered, when this was going to come about, and it finally has. It's an all Spanish version of Tangerine. And then finally, the very rare Korean version of Tangerine. I don't know if anyone there is able to speak or read Korean, but here it is, pretty thick. And I think what happens is countries where Tangerine is popular are big soccer countries. And I know South Korea is very big on soccer, so I think that's why they went for this. Just one last thing I wanted to tell you, though, before we move on, is about the dedication of this book. Someone's probably going to ask me if I had an evil older brother, and I did not. Most books that you read have a dedication, even if they're children's books. And about 10 years before Tangerine, I wrote another novel that never went anywhere. But my sister showed great dedication to me and to that novel. She spent every day typing up my handwritten notes and then retyping it and redoing it. And she worked for about a year getting this manuscript into shape that I sent out, and it never went anywhere. It was kind of a complete failure, which is true of most authors. The first thing they try to do doesn't go anywhere. But sadly, about 10 years later, when I wrote Tangerine, and I was able to sell it right away, She was dying of cancer. She's only a year older than me, and she had a very tough form of brain cancer. But I was able to go and talk to her and ask her how she would like her name to appear on the dedication. And she wrote it out just like this: Judy Bloor Bonfield, which is her married name. So that's what the dedication is about to this book, to thank her for the faith she had showed in me, those 10 years before. Now that I've depressed you all, we can move on to your questions. So, I'll be happy to hear them.
Since Paul's your main character, sort of excluding him, was there a certain character you related to while writing this book?
I'd say Paul, although as far as the characters go, I was a middle school language arts teacher in Florida, and I actually taught in that wooden portable in that field of dirt. It did not go down in a sinkhole, unfortunately. And so I can still picture kids. I mean, just like I'm looking at this group now, I can still picture kids who are my students who I used in my books. But I changed their names and I kind of put them in a blender and mixed them up. But I know who they are. And for example, there's a guy I played soccer with in high school who was the model for Victor. I know clearly who that is. So I'd say I relate to Paul personally, but I know all my characters in some way.
Okay. Where did you get the idea for Eric from?
Well, believe it or not, they started out as twins. Paul and Eric, the good twin and the bad twin, and it quickly became ridiculous. But before I became a young adult author, I used to go and hear young adult authors to learn what I could from them. And I went and heard Caroline Cooney speak one day. Her biggest book is called The Face on the Milk Carton. I don't know if any of you have ever run into that, but it's about this girl eating breakfast, looking at the missing kid thing on the milk carton and realizing she's that missing kid and that her parents are not her parents, and her whole life kind of falls apart. And what she said that day was, when you're writing for young adults, make your good guy good and your bad guy bad, and make sure the bad guy gets it in the end. So that was my idea for Eric. Paul needed a bad guy, and the better Paul got, the worse Eric got, which is why the twin thing didn't really work out. But by moving Eric up to high school, that gave me a chance to work with some other dichotomies, like middle school versus high school, soccer versus football, things like that.
Will there be a continuation of Tangerine?
No, to me, Tangerine kind of ends there. Pardon me. What you do as a writer is you lay out certain questions at the beginning. What happened to Paul's eyes? What's going on in his dysfunctional family? What caused all of this? And so I felt that by the end of Tangerine, you knew the answers to those questions. Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't do a multi-book project. Any of you Harry Potter fans out there? J.K. Rowling? I'm noticing this change in the world, because it used to be every hand would shoot up. So I guess not. But it's a very good series if you ever want to read it. And the author, J.K. Rowling, did not write them as a series of sequels. She wrote the entire thing at once in outline form, and she knew where the last book number 7, was going to end, and she knew what the last word was going to be in that book, which was scar. And as it turns out, it was pretty close. I think scar is the third to the last word or something like that. So Tangerine won't have a sequel, but I do respect people who write multi-book projects, and I think I'd like to do one myself.
How many different possible outcomes did you have for Tangerine, like for the end?
Only one. Yeah, that's part of my process. And any of you who would like to write a novel, I would encourage you to give it a try. But you're going to kill yourself if you just start writing and think you're going to wind up somewhere good. Because what I do now is I write a very specific outline, like J.K. Rowling. I know exactly where it's going. And then I actually start with the big scenes and the last scene. So most people give up on their novels because they're halfway through and they're just tired of it and they just see this endless road ahead of them. But if you do it this way, you see some good scenes that you've already written ahead of you. And you just say to yourself, well, all I have to do is get to those scenes. You know, it's a lot easier on you psychologically.
So write it in pieces and then in the end put it all together?
Well, write the climactic scene, like in Tangerine, that would be that big scene in the gym where Tino and Victor show up and they beat up the bad guys and Paul jumps off, and then write the final scene so you know how everything's going to wrap up. And then from there, I'd go back to the beginning and start. You have to know what the big stuff is, because if you're just hoping it's going to come to you, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Is the story of Tangerine based on something that happened in your life, like whether it's just like one small event that happened in the book?
Two things actually come from my life in Tangerine. I try to put something in all my books, and in Tangerine, it was soccer. I played soccer from age 8 right up into college. How many soccer players we have here? Okay, and a lot of female soccer players, which a lot of people don't realize. The American women are the best in the world. I mean, they win the World Cup, they win the gold medal at the Olympics, so you should absolutely pursue that. And then the other thing, I mentioned it earlier, was that I taught in that middle school in Florida. So I used a lot of my experience from that. And I always ask kids when I go there, so I'll ask you, are you Tangerine Middle School or are you Lake Windsor Middle School? What do you think? How many of you think you're Lake Windsor Middle School? No? How many of you think you're Tangerine?
I think we're kind of in the middle.
We're like in the middle, we're all good.
A little bit of each?
Yeah, there's some characteristics where I see in one school and then.
Yeah, because a lot of areas have, you know, the wealthy school and the not wealthy school. And kids are proud to go to both of them for different reasons, and that's good.
Did any scene specifically attach to you throughout Tangerine?
Did anything attach to me? You mean emotionally?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say just the idea, because there's just so much violence growing up, especially for boys, that people sometimes say, why do all these violent things happen in your book? In the case of Tangerine, it was to show that Paul wins, he triumphs by nonviolence. I mean, Paul is a good person and he attracts good people to him. And so I think that's what I was trying to get across in the message, that if you're a good person, even if it looks like you're not getting anywhere and you're losing in life, you're really not, because in the end, being a good person will come back to you. It's called karma. You know, you send out good things and good things come back. But unfortunately, the opposite is true as well. If you send out bad things, if you're bullying people or gossiping about people, you'll probably wind up having that happen to you somewhere not too far down the road.
You said that the characters themselves are based on real life people, but did the names have any special meaning to you?
Tangerine?
Like names?
Oh, their names of characters?
Mhm.
Yes, indeed. In fact, Paul comes from St. Paul. I don't know if you know the story of St. Paul in the Bible, but he actually persecuted Christians, and he was riding and got struck by lightning and got blinded. And he wound up a great defender of Christianity. So Paul is the one who has kind of become blinded in it. Some of the names, it's been a while, but I know some of the names have to do with like Puritan, or people who live in a walled city. So the names do have significance for me. Sometimes I'll even look them up in a dictionary and see what they mean, because they do have significance for me.
Yes, you. Sorry. Stand up.
Why did you like the part where Eric's put spray paint in Paul's eyes?
Why did I put that scene in? Well, it had to be something really bad, and yet not permanently bad. Like Paul is slowly getting better, but it had to be something really awful. It's kind of the same reason people sometimes ask, well, why does Mike Costello die? In the beginning of the book, and I did want readers to think, don't get too attached to these people, because bad stuff does happen, and anything can happen in this town. Where I live, Florida really is the lightning strike capital of the world, and there are lots of ways to die here. So it was just a matter of degree with the white spray paint. I didn't want it to be something permanent, but I wanted it to be something really awful.
Me? Okay. Why was the dad, the Fisher dad, why was he always on Eric's side and always stuck up for Eric and then barely even noticed Paul?
Because he wanted to be the football star. He's kind of living his life through his son, and it's not that he didn't love Paul, but Eric had so much more to offer him as far as moving into the world of big league football. Like, my son is a rock and roll guy, and I kind of live through him now. It's something that we do. So it was unfair of him to do that at Paul's expense, but that was his motivation.
What really happened to Eric in the end?
What happened to Eric at the end? Is that it?
Like after the book.
After it ends? Well,
Cliffhanger.
the thing I was saying before about good and bad karma, you got to figure all the bad stuff he did is coming back now to him. Specifically, that's tough to say. I'd say he definitely does not get into a good college as their place kicker, because he's got this baggage behind him. But as far as going to jail, that's hard to say. He and Arthur, they don't have criminal record. They do have parents with money. It wasn't anything premeditated. Lewis had this condition to begin with. So I'm sure they will be punished by the law, but I don't know to what degree.
Why did you always make Eric have a partner in crime?
Well, I think Eric's someone who needed a goon, a minion. And I just knew guys like that. They like to have someone big and dumb with them who they can send to do stuff. And that person, Arthur, is glad to be attached to someone, you know, kind of glamorous and charismatic like this football star.
So how come you created this obscure character Vincent at the end to kind of take a role for Arthur, like as a prologue to the book?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you don't hear about Vincent until then. But in my defense, I'd say it's because Paul had suppressed that memory that he was a character like Arthur, but he was Eric's minion back in Texas, or was it Alabama, where they lived when they lived there, and that's why you don't hear about him before then. He was a suppressed memory.
Where did the idea for Paul having all the flashbacks come from?
I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but it's just something I've always liked as a reader and as a movie fan. In fact, the opening scene, when I first sent it in, was a flashback, and my editor kind of talked me out of it. But it also shows that Paul's memory is starting to bubble to the surface, and these things are coming back to him.
When did Paul and Eric start hating each other?
Well, certainly at the beginning of the book, you know, there's that kind of obscure scene with guys in the car with the baseball bat, and Paul runs inside and tells his parents it was Eric. So he's already afraid of him by then. So I guess as far as Eric is concerned, it goes back to that scene with Vincent and the spray paint when Paul was much younger.
What influenced you to add in the Mexican culture into your story?
Oh, I'm sorry, say that one again.
What influenced you to add in your Mexican culture?
What influence was some culture?
The Mexican culture with Tino and Teresa.
Oh, the Mexican culture. Well, where I live, it's a big influence. They're kind of the good guys in the story. Where I live, we actually have a school called Maxi, where the kids are migrant kids, and they go there for like 2 months, and then they move. Then they go to another school, and then the next year they're back again for another 2 months. So that was a culture that I'm aware of. And one of the important things about the setting of Tangerine is that it's set in an agricultural area. This used to be an area where America's fruit came from. Only because of cold weather, it's become very risky for owners. And I met a lot of grove people when I was researching the book, and they don't have much money, and they invest everything they have in their crop each year, and if that crop freezes, they're done, you know. And that's what happened to a lot of people. So they started selling off their citrus groves and turning them into housing developments. So the people who used to make a living here, including people who traveled from Mexico, from southern Texas, they travel all the way up to Michigan, depending on what's being picked. You know, that was devastating to them too.
If you had to leave one scene from your book, which scene would it be?
Was that if I have to delete one scene?
Yeah.
Funny you should ask me that. My editor actually wanted me to delete the sinkhole scene, and I had to convince him that that kind of thing really happened in Florida, and it wasn't that outlandish. Honestly, I have to say, I don't think I would delete anything. I would even add a scene, because a lot of times people are confused about the imagery of the zombie who's following Paul around. And there was a third zombie scene, and it was pretty short. And he was dreaming about the zombie, and it had gotten struck by lightning and destroyed. And that was kind of Paul's leaving. The zombie was Paul's fears following him from Texas to Florida, and that kind of showed he had moved beyond that. He wasn't afraid anymore. So if anything, I would have put that back in.
How did Tangerine impact your life?
Very nicely, actually. I did not expect it to be anywhere near the hit it was. It recently passed 1 million sales and got picked up by a company. I don't know if you use Springboard. Springboard is a textbook company. It got picked up by Springboard. So, I mean, from Maine to Hawaii, kids read Tangerine, and it's really amazing to me. I have 5 other books, and every session I do like this is about Tangerine because of that. It's been picked up by schools.
May I finish off? I know we're getting close to the end of our time. I was going to ask you just 2 more questions. You mentioned your other books. Could you describe your other books and maybe what you have in the works? And also you mentioned research. Our students are currently researching different topics from Tangerine. So if you could address your use of how you research in writing a book.
Sure. I did some regular research. This was actually pre-Google, so I had to read books and look things up. But the most valuable research I did was talking to those people who own citrus. I mean, they told me there's a scene where they're fighting the freeze with burning tires and things like that. I mean, that comes exactly from the mouths of people I talk to out there. I just found that fascinating, that if you pour water on your grove and you freeze it, it'll stay at 32 degrees and it will survive. And if you don't, and it goes under 32 degrees, it'll die. So just stuff like that was really fascinating to me. My other books, one you might really like is called Taken, and it's about a girl in the near future who wakes up in an ambulance and realizes she's been kidnapped, she's been taken, is what they call then, and she probably has 24 hours left to live. And another one, those of you who like history and time travel, is London Calling, where a boy goes back to World War II London, which was being bombed by the Germans day and night. A very, very dangerous place. So Taken and London Calling.
Do you have anything in the works now?
Yes, I just wrote a play called Centennial, which is about World War I, and the 100th anniversary of World War I is coming up. And it's about kids at a school putting on a patriotic pageant to celebrate World War I, but it's a very old school, and kids who had gone there 100 years before start to appear and start to mingle with them, and they're the ones who actually went off and fought this war. So it's called Centennial.
Wow.
Well, we sure appreciate you taking time to speak with us today, Mr. Bloor. Students, would you express your appreciation?
All right, thanks very much. Looks like you have a great school there, somewhere between Tangerine and Lake Windsor. And, I hope you'll keep reading and always enjoy that as part of your entertainment. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.